The atrium of Vanguard Dynamics smelled like polished marble and quiet desperation. 58 men stood in perfect rows, all tailored suits and sharp creases. Then the glass doors hissed open. Elias Kane stepped inside wearing a faded red flannel, sleeves rolled once, carrying a worn canvas backpack. His 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, clung to his left leg, one small hand gripping the worn blue teddy bear she called Bluebell. The bear's left ear was hanging by a thread. Marcus Hale's voice cut across the space like a blade. "This isn't a playground, pal. The daycare's 2 blocks over." Laughter rippled through the candidates. A few clapped. Marcus adjusted the stainless Rolex Daytona on his wrist. The corner of his mouth curled in satisfaction. None of them knew that the quiet man they had just humiliated was the only person who could stop the CEO from losing everything she had built. 6 weeks later, the entire boardroom would watch that same head of security handcuffed on the floor, while the CEO's name stayed on the building and has vanished, because the quiet dad in the cheap boots had been one step ahead the entire time. What exactly was hiding inside the faded flannel? Tell me in the comments which country you're watching from right now. Elias had arrived at the tower that Sunday morning after an unmarked FedEx envelope slid under his apartment door at 8:47 a.m. The return address was a post office box in Arlington. Inside was a single interview slot at Vanguard Dynamics, the 51-story black glass tower that rose beside the river like a blade. No explanation, just the time, just his name. He needed the job. Sophie's asthma had worsened again. The inhalers alone were eating what was left of his savings. The third-floor walk-up on 14th and Lenox was cheap, but the radiator clanked like a dying engine, and the walls were thin enough to hear every neighbor's argument. After Lena's death, he had traded 187 combat missions and a chest full of classified ribbons for something quieter. For her. For them. Now he stood in the atrium, Sophie's small fingers twisting the strap of Bluebell, while Marcus Hale looked him up and down with the practiced disdain of a man who had never once been truly tested. Marcus was 41, immaculate in a charcoal Brioni suit, gleaming Oxford shoes catching the overhead lights. Acting director of security. Ambitious. Cornered. 2 weeks earlier, the CEO, Mara Ellison, had added an unknown name to his finalist list at the last possible minute. Marcus had smiled in the meeting, but the smile never reached his eyes. He was already quietly feeding encrypted updates to a number tied to rival investor Victor Lang. The pressure from Lang Capital was mounting. A silent buyout clause sat buried in the pending merger documents. January 17th was the trigger date. Marcus told himself the single father was simply an embarrassing mistake that would be corrected by noon. The first round was a written evaluation. Most candidates filled 3 pages with tactical jargon and acronyms. Elias slid forward a single index card. On it were 8 words and 1 phone number. Verification available here. Marcus picked it up, smirked, and dropped it into a wastebasket without reading it aloud. The room chuckled again. But later, during the threat video review, the tone shifted. They played a 75-second clip of a disguised courier moving through the lobby. Ex-SWAT candidates pointed out the obvious, the backpack, the hesitation at the turnstile. Elias waited until the video ended, then spoke without raising his hand. 16 seconds. Courier's left hand enters the dead zone behind the marble column. Micro-expression on the face matches the courier from the Lang Capital breach last August. Second vector at 41 seconds. Right shoulder, pressure sensor delay in the elevator threshold. They're not testing entry. They're mapping response time. The room went still. Marcus leaned back in his leather chair. Lucky guess, Kane. We're not paying for fortune tellers. From the 47th floor, Mara Ellison watched the live feed on her monitor. She saw the way Elias's shoulders stayed relaxed, the way his eyes tracked movement 2 beats before anyone else. Something flickered behind her gaze. Recognition, maybe, or the first crack in a wall she had stopped noticing. The combat trial came next. They paired Elias against Trent Rollins, a 265-pound ex-pro wrestler turned private security contractor. The man looked like he could stop a truck with his chest. The candidates formed a loose circle on the training mat. Marcus crossed his arms, already writing the outcome in his head. 19 seconds later, Trent was on his back, breathing hard, staring at the ceiling. Elias had barely moved. A quiet redirection of momentum, one measured pivot, the bigger man's own weight doing the rest. No visible effort, no Hollywood flair, just physics and muscle memory that had once kept entire villages alive on the far side of the world. Marcus's jaw flexed once. Mara's voice came through the overhead speaker, calm and final. Hire him. Starting salary, $168,000. He shadows me beginning tomorrow. Marcus nodded slowly, but his hand tightened around the tablet until the screen protector creaked. That night, Elias carried Sophie up the 3 flights of stairs on Lennox. She was half asleep against his shoulder, Bluebell dangling from one small fist. The bear's worn fur brushed his cheek. He could still smell the faint trace of a strawberry shampoo Lena used to use on her hair. He did not know yet that in 10 days he would be standing one measure pace behind Mara Ellison everywhere she went, reading every room before she entered, noticing micro-tensions in voices and shoulders that no one else caught. He did not know that Sophie would be brought to the office twice when the sitter canceled, that the little girl would leave a crayon drawing of 3 stick figures under an oak tree on the CEO's desk. And he did not know that Marcus Hale was already typing another encrypted message to Victor Lang. Fingers flying across the screen at 2:14 a.m., the stainless Rolex reflecting cold blue light from the monitor. The debt had just begun to be collected, but the man in the faded flannel was only getting started. Marcus watched the new hire from the corner of the executive floor the next morning, arms folded so tight the seams of his Brioni suit strained. Elias stood 2 steps behind Mara in the glass-walled conference room, eyes moving like a scanner. When a junior analyst's voice cracked on the Q3 projections, Elias's hand drifted an inch toward the small of his back. Old habit, then settled. Mara noticed. She said nothing, but her pen paused mid-signature on invoice number 4471. By day, for the pattern was set. Elias moved when she moved. He tasted the coffee before it reached her lips. He killed a power flicker in the server room at 11:07 p.m. with a bypass circuit he built from parts in the maintenance closet, restoring trading algorithms 43 seconds before the exchange deadline. The night shift techs never learned his name. They just started calling the fix the ghost patch. Sophie came to the office again on Friday. The sitter had the flu. The 5-year-old sat cross-legged beneath the marble reception desk, Bluebell propped in her lap like a silent co-pilot. When Mara swept past at 4:12 p.m., Sophie held up the bear. "He says you look tired, Miss Mara." Mara stopped. The corner of her mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile the floor had seen in months. She crouched, designer heels clicking once against the tile, and touched the bear's frayed ear. "Tell him I'm always tired. Comes with a chair." That was the first time Elias let the mask slip a fraction. He allowed himself one slow breath that carried the scent of strawberry shampoo and gun oil and something like relief. Marcus did not breathe relief. At 2:19 a.m., he sent another message to Victor Lang. This one included a grainy still from the security feed. Elias redirecting Trent Rollins. The subject line read, "Confirm identity. Payment upon delivery." The Rolex on his wrist caught the monitor's glow again, cold and certain. The following Tuesday, the mini-crisis arrived wearing a federal badge. 2 agents from the Treasury's FinCEN division appeared at the 27th floor reception at 9:47 a.m. They carried a warrant for suspicious transaction patterns linked to an offshore account Mara had inherited from her late father. The kind of account that looked dirty on paper even when it wasn't. The whole C-suite gathered in the boardroom like spectators at an execution. Marcus stood at the head of the table, spotless Italian shoes planted wide, trying not to look victorious. Mara's voice stayed level. "We'll have our counsel here within the hour." The lead agent, a woman with a voice like dry gravel, shook her head. "We need full ledger access now, Ms. Ellison, or we start freezing accounts today." The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lawyers were still 40 minutes out. Traders on the floor below were already calling their wives about possible layoffs. Elias stood behind Mara's chair, silent, Bluebell's crayon drawing of the oak tree still taped to the corner of her monitor like a child's fragile flag. He spoke for the first time in the meeting. "May I see the warrant number, agent?" The agent blinked at the janitor-looking man in the faded flannel. She slid the paper across the polished walnut. Elias read it once. Then he reached into his back pocket and produced a folded letter, creased so many times the edges had gone soft as cloth. The same letter he had carried since the night Sophie was born. He laid it beside the warrant. The paper was an old commendation from the Defense Clandestine Service, dated 8 years earlier. It listed a call sign no one in the room had ever heard, Rook 7. It authorized untraceable accounts in 7 jurisdictions for operational cover. The final paragraph carried the signature of a deputy director whose name still made people lower their voices. The lead agent read it. Her shoulders changed first, then her voice. "Sir, we were not informed." Marcus's face lost 2 shades of color. The Patek on his wrist suddenly felt heavy. Elias kept his tone low, almost conversational. "That's the point of cover, agent. Inform no one. But the account you're chasing? It's still active. Still mine. And every dollar that ever touched it carried my biometric lock." He tapped the warrant twice with one calloused finger. "Call your supervisor. Tell him Rook 7 is standing in front of you. Tell him the debt on that ledger was paid in full the day I carried my daughter out of a burning embassy in Damascus. Then apologize to Ms. Ellison for wasting her morning." The agent swallowed. She stepped into the hallway. 30 seconds later, the warrant was withdrawn. The federal team left without another word, shoes squeaking on the marble like they couldn't get to the elevator fast enough. Mara stared at the commendation still lying on the table. Her eyes traced the faded ink, the small coffee stain in the upper corner that had been there since the night Elias folded it into his breast pocket before flying 287 missions no one would ever log. She looked up at him. "You could have told me. I wasn't here to tell stories," Elias said. "I was here to keep you breathing." In the hallway, Marcus watched the agents disappear behind closing doors. His jaw worked once, twice. The encrypted thread on his phone now carried 3 unread replies from Victor Lang. He deleted them all. Then he looked through the glass at Elias, still standing 2 measured paces behind Mara, Bluebell's crayon tree glowing softly on the monitor beside her. For the first time, Marcus Hale felt the shape of the debt coming due. He did not yet know how much it would cost. He only knew the man in the faded flannel had just begun to tighten the rope. That evening on Lenox Street, Sophie raced ahead of Elias up the 3 flights, Bluebell bouncing against her hip. At the landing, she turned, eyes bright. "Daddy," Miss Mara smiled today. A real one, like the ones Mommy used to make. Elias knelt, brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. The faint strawberry scent lingered on the bear's fur. He thought about the commendation still resting in Mara's desk drawer, about the micro-tension in Marcus's shoulders that afternoon, about the quiet war room now forming inside his own mind. He smiled at his daughter, small and real. "Yeah, baby." She did, but the collection was nowhere near finished. And the next move would come from a place no one in that glass tower expected. Marcus didn't sleep that night. At 2:14 a.m., he stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse on the 42nd floor, Brioni sleeves rolled once, Patek glinting under the city glow. The encrypted replies from Victor Lang had multiplied to 17. He left them unread. Below, the streets looked like glowing veins. Somewhere down there, a single dad in faded flannel was rewriting the rules. The next 6 weeks became a slow, surgical unraveling. Elias started with the paper trail no one else had ever followed. Invoice number 4471 from a shell contractor in Singapore. A quiet wire of $1.78 million that had vanished into Marcus's favorite Cayman account. Elias moved at night. After Sophie was asleep, Bluebell's bear tucked under one arm like a silent witness. He rebuilt the audit logs line by line on an old laptop balanced on his kitchen table. The smell of fresh solder and burnt coffee filled the small apartment each dawn. By week 3, the board began to notice odd discrepancies. A procurement bid that refused to balance. A satellite uplink contract dated 2 days before the official tender even opened. Marcus called emergency meetings, Italian loafers tapping impatiently under the mahogany table, but the numbers kept sliding away from him. Then came the quiet competence flash that made the first crack visible. At the quarterly compliance review, the entire C-suite sat in the glass-walled boardroom on the 31st floor. Marcus was mid-sentence, pointing at a slide that showed perfect green compliance bars when the projector froze. A single new window opened across every screen. No logo, just white text on black. Contract 287 Damascus. Pilot call sign, Ghost Actual. Logged flight hours, 287. Unlogged, 412. Would you like the real books, Mr. Hale? The room went dead quiet. Marcus's pointer trembled once against the screen. Elias sat in the back row, wearing the same flannel, arms folded, Bluebell's crayon drawing folded neatly in his shirt pocket like a hidden flag. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The slide advanced by itself. Every falsified signature appeared in crisp 4K. Every redirected payment. Every time Marcus had used the company jet for personal weekends in Monaco while claiming executive oversight. Mara Ellison watched from the far end of the table. Her eyes moved from the screen to Elias and back again. She said nothing, but the corner of her mouth lifted in that same real smile Sophie had noticed weeks earlier. Marcus tried to kill the feed. The system locked him out. For 93 seconds, the entire board watched the debt come due in perfect silence. When the final slide appeared, an image of the commendation with its coffee stain, it carried one line underneath in Elias's steady handwriting. I wasn't here to tell stories. The lights came up. Marcus's face had gone the color of old ash. His Patek suddenly looked too heavy on his wrist. That was the private fracture. The public one arrived 4 days later in the main auction hall of the Lenox Corporate Tower. The entire staff had been summoned for what was billed as a leadership transition briefing. 214 people filled the tiered seats. Italian shoes clicked nervously on marble. The smell of fresh espresso and fear hung in the air. Marcus stood at the podium in a fresh Brioni suit, trying to project the same effortless command that had always worked before. His voice cracked on the second sentence. Then the side doors opened. Elias walked in carrying a single cardboard box, the same box Marcus had once ordered him to take and leave. Inside it rested the commendation, the folded crayon tree, and one other item no one had seen yet. The original ownership certificate for 41% of the company's stock, dated 11 years earlier, signed by the founder on his deathbed and witnessed in a Damascus safe house between mortar rounds. Elias set the box on the podium. The microphone picked up the soft scrape of cardboard on polished wood. Mr. Hale dismissed me as scrap metal, he said, voice low, steady, carrying to every seat. Told me my kind had no value here. Today that box is worth $412 million. And every share now votes with the people who actually kept this company alive. A rustle swept the room like wind through dry grass. Phones rose. Cameras rolled. Marcus's hands gripped the lectern until his knuckles matched his shoes. Elias turned to him directly. You owe Mara Ellison an apology for the morning you wasted. You owe every man and woman in this room for the years you spent cashing checks they earned. And you owe my daughter an apology for teaching her that quiet men in flannel can be thrown away. The hall held its breath. Marcus stared at the box, at the faded coffee stain, at the small stuffed bear now sitting on top like a patient judge. His shoulders folded inward. For the first time in his polished life, he looked small. He stepped around the podium. The Italian shoes moved like they weighed 1,000 pounds. In front of 214 witnesses, he stopped 3 feet from Elias. His voice came out hoarse. I was wrong. About all of it. I thought competence had to wear a suit. I thought loyalty could be bought with a title. I treated you like you were nothing, when you were the only thing holding us together. I am sorry, yes. I am sorry, Mara. I'm sorry to every person I looked past. The words landed like stones in still water. No one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence itself was the verdict. Marcus walked out without waiting for the board's vote. His Patek stayed on the lectern like a discarded crown. 3 months later, the tower bore a new name on its marble facade: Ellison Graham Holdings. Mara ran operations with the same calm she once used to shield a terrified little girl. Elias kept the third-floor office with the view of Lenox Street. He still wore flannel most days. The commendation hung behind his desk, coffee stain and all. On warm evenings, Sophie and Bluebell raced up the 3 flights ahead of him. The strawberry scent on the bear had faded to memory, but the crayon tree still glowed on the monitor every time a new contract cleared. One night, Elias found Marcus waiting on the landing. No suit, no watch, just a plain coat and tired eyes. I sold the penthouse, Marcus said quietly. Donated the proceeds to the veterans fund you started. Figure it was the least I could do. Elias studied him for a long moment, then handed him the bear. She outgrew it last week. Thought you might need something to remind you what matters. Marcus took the worn plush like it was made of glass. His thumb traced the faded ear. I won't forget again, he said. They stood there until the street lights flickered on. 2 men who had learned, the hard way, that the debt is always collected. Sometimes the collector simply decides to let you carry part of it with honor. And in the quiet years that followed, the company thrived not because of titles or Italian shoes, but because a single dad in flannel once carried a child through fire and refused to let anyone forget what real strength looks like. The rest of us only had to watch, learn, and choose to be better when our own moment came.